I'm Steve Thomason. I am an artist, a seminary professor, and a pastor. And every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central Time, I go live and invite you into my studio so that you can, I just want to share the process with you that I go through to create a cartoonist guide to the Bible. So this summer, my big goal is to illustrate the book of Acts as a graphic novel. This is the fifth in the series. I've illustrated all four Gospels as graphic novels over the last 4 years. And hey, Victoria is on. Good to see you, Victoria. Thanks for joining me. Hey, yeah, so feel free to drop a comment or a question in the chat, and I'd love to respond to those questions and comments as I go through the process. So I just set aside an hour every week. And I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. One, I'm illustrating this book because I'm putting together a course for Faith Lead Academy that will hopefully be released sometime in late spring of next year. And so this illustrated Acts will be the basis of that course. So I'm super excited about that. And I'm doing this live session as just kind of as a way to keep me accountable to the process and to just have some fun. So I love sharing my art and sharing my process with people. So the first thing I want to do is transition and just get you up to date, because this is a huge week for me because we're changing everything. We're moving into phase 2 of the process. This week we're actually going to be doing color, which I'm super excited about. We're going to be coloring in Photoshop. In just a couple minutes, I'm going to show you that process. We're going to just dive in and do it. But first, last week, I finished penciling all the pages. And so let me just show you, and I also did something yesterday that I think is really important to the process of Acts. So you can go to this page at cartoonistbible.com/acts, or you can always hover over the Explorer Bible and click right on Acts. And you'll see that yesterday I put together the interactive visual index or table of contents for the whole thing. So the Cartoonist Guide to Acts has 43 pages. So each one of these boxes is one page in the graphic novel. And all the pages are created, and every page has the penciled version of it on it. So I'm just going to randomly choose page 23, which is the Jerusalem Council. So you can see up here, it's got Acts 15, and the text itself is actually interactive, so you can click on that and read the text. And then these are the penciled pages. So you can see that all the layout is done, and the layout, the word balloons, and the pencils. So what I've got, and then so you come down here, and you can either navigate to the previous page or the next page, or you can always go back to the home page no matter where you are. So every page is on this index. I have actually completed pages 1 through 4 in the colored version. So this is what I painted this morning, and now it is online. So what we're going to paint today is page 5. So this is what it looked like so far. This is the rough pencil pages, and we're going to paint it. I think that's pretty exciting. So let me switch over to my Cintiq workspace, and I've got something new for you today. You can see in the lower left-hand column corner, ta-da! I've added a third camera to my screen so that you can see my actual hands in context. So sometimes I think that's helpful for people, because especially if you've never actually drawn on a tablet before, it's kind of hard to know what's going on. Thanks, Victoria. I'm glad you like that. Yeah, super fun. Yeah, so this is Photoshop. Oh, I just noticed something. When I click over to my Photoshop, I lose my chat window. So I need to put my chat window back in the dock here in my OBS streaming service right over here. See if that works. And then if I switch back to Photoshop, sweet. Okay, I fixed it on the fly, improvising. It's all about adaptive learning. Okay, so let me give you a tour of what's going on. So if you've been following me in this process for the last 6 weeks, you would know that everything that I've done so far, I've done on my iPad in an app called Comic Draw. And it's a fabulous app. And I use it to do the layouts and the pencils. But then I take those penciled pages, I create all of the layers, and I export it as a Photoshop document. And then I export it to my iMac. So I'm working on an iMac here in my home studio. When I'm at school, I have an office at the seminary, and I have a nice Mac studio with a studio display there. And there I have a Cintiq 24 that I draw on. Here in my home studio, because I have a very small desk, I have this, which is a Cintiq 16. And it is a wonderful machine. I just got it at the end of last summer, and I love it. The 24 is massive. The 16 fits really nicely here on my desk. I've got a little stand with it so I can adjust the angle, which is really cool. So I'm in Photoshop, and what I've got going on here is you can see the layout. I've got my color palette up here. So this color wheel I can turn around. I've got some color swatches that I've pre-designed here. I created a color swatch collection called Axe for my project. And then over here I've got my layers. And down here I've got my brushes. So I've got my workspace all set up the way I want it. And let me just show you what happens is when I export the document, it looks like this, right? This is my sketching group, and I can turn that layer on and off. And that's what came over from Comic Draw. But now I've got I have a partner now. My wife Lana is doing the basic block out coloring for me, which is saving me a ton of time. She and I used to work together like this quite a bit back in my Spot Productions days when I had my freelance studio, and then I kind of got out of the habit of doing that. But now on this project, since this is such an aggressive project for me because I'm trying to get 43 pages painted in the next 9 weeks, so that means 5 pages a week plus the other projects I'm working on. So she is helping me out. So let me show you what happens is when she gets this, she gets, let's see, boom, boom, like that, right? So she's got, what comes over is the panel, which is the box around it, and then the letters and the sketch, and that's what comes over from Comic Draw. And so what Lana does is, well, what I do is I come in and I ink it. Let me show you what the ink looks like. Let me zoom in here. And so I take this stylus right here, you can see it, and I ink this with a brush called Belgian Comic. That's the brush that I've come to really like here on in my Photoshop. And I ink it. Let me turn off the sketching group for you to see what the clean inks. So this is what the panel looks like. And close these and you can get a nice shot of the panel. So that panel is now inked. And what Lana does is she comes in and then she fills in this box with gray. So that gives me a nice little background for the panel. And then she blocks in, actually I have a second layer of inking. So I did the inking of the background on a separate layer. And so she'll come in and on different layers, she will just take one color. I've chosen like a neutral base color, and she'll go in and she'll just color in the figures for me on a separate layer. And so you'll see here that I actually have 3 layers of solid colors. You might think, well, what is that all about? Well, if any of you have ever known someone who is an airbrush artist, so I started off as an airbrush artist. And back in the day when you were doing airbrushing, if you wanted to get a nice clean hard edge, like behind a figure. You had to use this stuff called frisket, where you would lay down this clear film, transparent film that was sticky on one side, lay it over your whole illustration, and then you'd have to take a little razor blade and cut it out, and then peel away the parts that you wanted to paint on, and then airbrush. And that was called frisketing. Well, basically that's what Lana is doing for me digitally. She's doing all the frisket layers so that I can come in and very easily do the painting. So we're going to start painting, and hopefully in our time together today, I'll be able to paint this panel and you can see how the magic works. Now, I might not talk the whole time. Let me see, how's my volume here? I've got a little bit of music. I don't know if you can hear the music or not. Turn the music up a little bit so that while I'm painting, you have something to listen to. And again, if you have any questions about what I'm doing along the way, don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. Okay, so let's get to painting. All right, the first thing I want to do is I got this panel gray, and what I want to do is click this button, and that's called an alpha lock. And that makes it so that I can't paint outside. I can only paint on pixels that already exist on that layer. And so I'm going to choose this sky color, and I'm going to just use my paint bucket and fill in the sky. So instead of having this gray background, I'm going to have a sky background. And then I've been using this gouache detail brush to block in big colors, and I want to put in kind of a neutral ground color in the foreground. So this is like the stones of the temple. So what's happening here, this is Acts chapter 3. You can look this up and read it if you want. Acts chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. This is Peter and John as they are going to the temple to worship. Because remember, they're still very Jewish men. And they go to temple as their normal practice. And while they're going to the temple, they find this beggar. He's been there. We find out later in the story that he's been there for 40 years. Oh, thanks, Victoria. The music is better now. Perfect. Excellent. Thanks for letting me know. All right. Let's see. So I've just laid in this basic color for the ground. And then I've got this color background. Okay, so now this color, see how it's all on one layer. And what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to go in and subdivide this. Lana did an excellent job of doing the buildings in the background, but I'm going to use my lasso tool, do the freehand lasso, and I'm going to actually cut out the temple in the background because I want to be able to paint it more freely. Now I only have to be precise on that part of it because I'm just cutting out, boom, that part of the background. And if I hit Shift Command V, it'll paste it in place. But you'll see now that it is its own layer. And I'm going to name that temple so I don't lose track of it. And I'm going to put the color background above the temple background. Okay, so now I can choose the temple, and I want to make the temple a different color than this. I'm going to lighten it up, and that's a little too beige. I actually want to make that a little bit more white-ish in the background like that. Yeah, that's cool. And just for the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and hit alpha lock on this. So now just the temple is masked out, right? Oh, first what I got to do is the sky. The sky should never be just one solid flat color. So I'm going to go to my sky color, I'm going to lighten it up and go way to white, and then just I use this, I use a gouache. No, I think I'm just going to use my airbrush. Big airbrush like this. This airbrush is pressure sensitive to opacity, so if I touch it really lightly, you can see that it'll get just a little, it'll just bring in that lighter color, because sky is always lighter toward the horizon, and that's because of atmospheric diffusion. And then if I bring my airbrush, make it smaller, I can just put some wispy indications of clouds. So you want to make your sky just at least a little bit interesting, right? Okay, so now I can come to my temple, and I'm going to choose that. If I click eye, it's my eyedropper, and if I get just a little bit darker than that, I've been using this this nice watercolor wash. I want to do I think just this watercolor right here, and just laying in a little bit of shadowing, but because it's watercolor, it has a little texture to it, which I think is kind of interesting. We'll just lay that in, and then also do that right here. And by just touching a couple different places, I can kind of get the texture of like the big limestone blocks in the wall. And I try to keep a pretty loose approach to my painting in this, because I just like that. I don't want it to have a slick airbrushed feel to it. I want it to have kind of a rough, grainy, loose, kind of like when I paint my gouaches out in the field, kind of a plein air feel. Not quite that loose. I don't know. I just like the loose wash. Now I'm going to come in here with this gold and just touch the top of the temple, because it was adorned with gold. Okay, there we go. That's really all I'm going to do for the temple, because it's way in the background, and I'm actually going to come up here to my background ink, and if I hit alpha lock on that, I can also just if I choose the color of the block and come back to my airbrush, then I can just lightly go over those lines a little bit. Oh, for some reason my airbrush keeps defaulting to multiply, and I don't want that. I can just knock these lines back a little bit, because I don't want those lines to be as dark as the lines in the foreground, and that just helps push the background, the building in the background. Okay, so there we go. Our background is taking shape. Now I just want to lay in, come up here to these walls and just do a little bit of work with that. And I don't want these walls to be that dark gray. I want them to be kind of a little bit more intense of that. Yeah, a little bit more like that. Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to go ahead and just use my airbrush for a little bit, just to I gotta do alpha lock. See, so when I have alpha lock, like if I paint in the sky, nothing happens, but then when I come over to the block, it starts working. So I just want to put in some basic tones here, and then I'll come in with my watercolor and get some texture. I don't want to go too crazy on this, but so getting the basic light and dark contrasts for the steps. Okay, now I'm going to come down to the ground. Panel 1 gray is just my basic background. I want to go back to that watercolor. I'm still building my watercolor, building my brush library, if you will. And I haven't completely chosen the watercolors that I want to stick with. This irregular edge looks interesting. And so, let's see. Oh yeah, this will be nice. So I'm just going to use this to kind of lay in some, just some texture for the back, for the ground. I'm imagining this like pavers in the ground, you know, so you can just, I don't know, just see a little texture in there. And then if I make this a little bit bigger, I can do the same. Oh, that's because I need to go onto my color background where the walls are and just put some block texture. Yeah, that's kind of nice. I like that. Okay, now another thing that I want to do is if I come up above, how are we doing out there? You guys with me? All right. If I come up, if I make a new layer and make it, if I set it to multiply, then I can use my airbrush. And I just want to lay in some shadows. Yeah, choose that. Under my characters. This is kind of middle of the day, so the shadows will be, you know, directly under the characters. And I'll probably change, update that when I get more details in there. Okay. So now let's go to, I want to go ahead and actually color and paint the main characters and show you how I do that. So on color 1, just the block out of the characters themselves. Let me zoom in on these 3 main characters. The first thing I do is I hit alpha lock, and then I come down here to my gouache detail, and then I start laying in local color. And what local color means, let me pick my base color. These are just flat colors, and they're all on one layer. And I don't care about shading yet. I just want to block out basic colors. And so all of my characters at this point in the story are Palestinian Jewish people. And pretty much everybody had really, really dark hair in that ethnic group. And so this guy, he's kind of got, I'm going to give him a little bit of a grayish feel to his hair, because in those days, being 40 years old and being a beggar, This guy's had a rough life. I'm gonna guess he's got some gray going on. And then I also do the clothing. And so I've got this basic beige-ish color that I typically make for their clothes. And I color that in. And I'm using this gouache detail brush because it's solid, but it also has a little bit of texture to it, because I don't want it to just be like super plain old one solid color field. That would be boring. All right, now this color I've chosen as just a basic kind of brown. Yeah, I want that to be, I want his, this is John, and I want John's coat to be a little bit more brownish, less gray, more like brown that has some like burnt sienna in it, maybe. So let's get that. Their sandals will probably be brown. For some reason, I just imagine the ancient world, a lot of brown, a lot of earth tones. I have a special color for Peter's. This is Peter's overcoat, whatever, outer coat. Kind of a pea green. I don't know why I've chosen that. It'll get darker and more interesting in a minute. See, what I do is I'm just laying in the basic local color, and then I'm going to go in and shade it and highlight it on different layers. And go darker for the back. Now this guy, this poor guy, he's been begging his whole life. So if this is my basic just kind of a dingy gray. There we go. So those are my local colors. So now what I do is, this is where the magic of Photoshop comes in. I'm going to add a layer. I'm going to choose multiply. And then I'm going to do a clipping mask. And what a clipping mask does is it locks this layer onto the parameters of the layer below it, so that I can't color outside of that layer. It's pretty cool. And since it's multiply, what that does is it darkens what's underneath it. And so I'm going to go to my base skin layer and then just go a little bit darker and start laying in just basic shadows. Since we're kind of at noonday, the shadows are going to be directly below. So this whole leg will be in shadow. And these are just basic shadows. I'll get more detailed in a minute. Just kind of blocking it in. I'm going to choose that color and then just go darker with it. what I'm doing now is just with a finer brush, just trying to hit a little bit more detail. And this is actually a really small panel, so I'm not trying to be, this is not a super rendered amazing illustration. This is a quick light and shadow for, you know, a graphic novel page. And so what I've done is just basically indicated a little bit of three-dimensionality for it. Because, you know, you could futz with it for days, and I don't have that kind of time. So I just want to get the basic information and then move on. Otherwise this would take me, you know, 5 years to illustrate. I ain't got no time for that. Okay, now I'm going to go to the next layer and again hit clipping mask. But this one I'm going to set to overlay. And I'm going to use my gouache detail brush for this, because I found that I kind of like the way it looks. And I'm going to come up here and do some highlights. If I just do, make this brush a little bit bigger. If I just outline the shapes a little bit, gives it a nice little distinction, pulls out the edges. Kind of tells you where the light's coming from. And then you'll see I'll come back and do another pass on this to soften it up just a little bit. Let me zoom out and see how that's looking. The cool thing about the overlay is that it plays with the colors underneath it. So you can just use a basic highlighting color and it does its magic. And now I'm going to go back to my airbrush. Just kind of hit these top areas, just lighten them up a little bit. All right, how we doing? Maybe a little bit in here for his. And then if I'm gonna just do one more layer, make that clipping mask and do overlay, and just do kind of lighten up the top of that just a little bit. Okay. That one is a little too much. There we go. I just noticed that I have some overspray down here. Wondering where that's coming from. There it is. I need to make that. I need to make that a clipping mask to my background. And now I don't have the overlay. Overspray, I should say. Okay, now the last thing I want to do for this is color this background crowd. So first thing I'm going to do is get my airbrush, choose that color, go a little bit darker, just kind of do a basic light to dark on them. And these are background characters, so they don't have to have much detail at all. Make this a little smaller. Just get a little darker, a little bit of definition. And then a couple of these characters have some definition to them, so I'll use my detail brush, maybe create just a few marks. Hello, saw your social training video recently, appreciated. Thanks, Hudson TD777. Thanks for being on the call on the session today. I hope you're enjoying the video. I'm just painting away, so this is truly a live art session. I'm working on what I would have been working on today anyway. Like when this call is over, I'm just going to keep on working on this page until I get it done. My hope is to get the whole page done by today, by the end of today. Okay, I'll make this a little bit darker. So then the last thing that I'll do is just come in with just some rim lighting, just to give it a little bit of contrast. Like that. Really loose. These characters are really gestural. They're just kind of texture in the background to show that Peter and John are doing this in the context of the crowd that is coming to temple. And so the crowd's going to notice this pretty quickly. All right, now let's take a step back from this panel and take a look and see what we got. I told you I was probably going to come back to those shadows, and I definitely am. And I think I'm going to use this brush just to hit some actual, some like real dark underneath there, and then use my airbrush to soften that out. Just to create some nice contrast. And then I'll get underneath these feet. The shadows really anchor the figure to the ground, you know? So Peter's reaching across. We don't want these feet to feel like they're floating, so we need to put a nice dark shadow right underneath it. And then I got to come up to the color background to get the shadow underneath there. There's one more thing I'm going to do, and that is get a little bit tedious, and I'm going to use my lasso tool. Whoops. Bummer. I got to start that over. Use my lasso. Ah. Okay. Sorry about that. I got a little ahead of myself. Lasso tool. Click once there. Drag that all the way over here. And come down, click there. Click here. Come up. And now I've got this little marked out space. So what I'm going to do is choose my gradient tool. I'm going to click that color, and I'm going to come down darker just a little bit. And then you'll see what that does. If I hit deselect, then that creates a nice contrast. Whoops. And I noticed that since I had a couple different colors there. So deselect. Go back to my polygon select tool. Do that again. This will make those highlights of the stairs really stand out. Just a simple thing like that helps create a little bit of interest in the background without getting too overly detailed. Oh, bummer. I missed that one. Whoops, do that again, like that. And we'll do one more on this bottom step. All right, there we go. So let's see, if I make these smaller, then we can zoom in. And what do you think? How's that look for that panel? It's kind of fun. Now it's time to do panel 2. We've got a little bit more time. We've got about 13 minutes left. Take a drink of water. And we got a lot more panels to go. All right, so that is panel 1. Now panel 2. Oh, this one will be pretty easy. So Peter reaches down. Oh, let's pull the word balloons. He says, "I don't have money, but I'll give you what I have. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, stand up and walk." And then what I think is actually the most amazing part. Oh, thanks, Victoria. Glad you stuck through that whole panel. That was awesome. Thanks for being here. So what I think is cool, what I think is most important about this is that Peter reaches out and touches this man, gives him the right, the right hand of fellowship, if you will, and reaches out. And so what we're going to do is we're going to color these hands. So we've got more detail because we're really zoomed in. So the first thing I'm going to do is use my gouache detail brush, and let me open up my color palette and just show a distinction in the color of the fingernails, because that's something that is a different tone on the hand, and the cuticles are a little bit lighter. Like that, so that just gives a little detail. And then we have I think I am going to do a little bit of actual rough painting, and so I'm going to take this detail brush, but I'm going to bring its opacity down to like 36%, and just start painting it a little bit. Because I don't want it to have that flat airbrushy look to it. And by doing 30-ish%, I can do layers. I can build it up. If I want to get darker, I can just go back over it. But again, I have the alpha lock on, so I don't have to worry about going outside the lines of the actual silhouette. So I want to contrast this man's hand, because this guy's been begging on the street corner for 40 years, and he's beat up. And so I am going to, I have this spattered, one of my favorite artists named Aaron Blaze. He's got some cool brushes, and I'm going to use this spatter brush to kind of give, like, let me get a little bit more opacity, kind of like age spots maybe on his hand. I don't know, just something. Something to show that he's different than Peter. And I'll just put them right across, and then I'll blend them out when it comes to Peter's hand. So let me take my my blending tool, and then on Peter's hand, I have this all-purpose blender. I can just come in here and smooth them out so that you don't see them on his hand. That's a quick way to do a masking. Alright, so it's kind of interesting. I don't know if that worked, but I have a hearing impairment, so visual charts and drawing are helpful. Keep up the great work. Oh, thanks, Hudson. So glad that you found something helpful in this. Ooh, that opacity. See, what happened there was that when I chose that brush again, the opacity went back to 100%, and that's a little bit much. put in some bold lines because we can always smooth them out later. When I have this real close-up, I want it to have a little bit of texture to it. Like a little bit of painting. And I'm just making this up. I'm not looking at a reference or anything. Some would argue maybe you should be looking at a reference, but hey. Okay, now if I come up here and just do some highlighting. We're getting close to our time here. I want to do one thing before we leave and show you how the background of this is going to change everything. So if I come here to pencil gray, I actually want, when I have like a, I'm going to do a, whoops, I need to alpha lock that, and let's go to almost 100%. And then what I want to do is I want to show like the power coming out from it. So I'm going to do a clipping mask on that panel, and then I want to do an overlay and come up with kind of a bold That's kind of cool. And then if I come below, ooh, too much. What if I use this gouache wash? Just trying to show like the power, because I think this is where the power is in that handshake as he grabs that hand. And so then if I take and put a layer above that and make it an overlay, and then use the airbrush maybe too yellow. Let's do it more. You can just kind of get. So let's see. Let's look at our page. Boom. Kapow. There it is. Coming right up on 3 o'clock. So we got 2 panels done in this hour. And let's see. Hey, thanks for watching. That's been our hour of drawing the Bible. Again, you can go to cartoonistbible.com/acts and check in. I'll be posting every page as I finish painting them throughout the week. And I'll see you next Thursday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.